Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here, and it is indeed another day in paradise. I heard there were snowflakes in New York this morning, so it's good to be here. So as Janet said earlier, the Foundation Center has been working with Open Society Foundations over the past year or so to bring greater visibility within philanthropy about supporting Black men and boys and really promoting greater and more effective engagement among grant makers on this issue. So today I'm going to be talking to you about two recent efforts, two pieces of work that we've recently undertaken. The first is a research report that came out in October, which looked at philanthropic support for Black men and boys, and it looked at the landscape nationally to see which foundations were active in this field, what kinds of activities they're engaged in, and really to track the national trends in grant making. And I also want to tell you a little bit today about a portal that we launched just last week on Black male achievement called bmafunders.org, and we're really excited about that, so I'll tell you a little bit about that today as well. So let me start with the report. The Foundation Center has been documenting the activities of U.S. foundations for more than 50 years now. And each year our staff codes more than 150,000 grants, which makes up our research sample of grant making. We typically code grants that are $10,000 or more from about 1,500 of the largest foundations in the U.S. And this research set accounts for about half of all grant making domestically. One quick caveat about this data set, it typically doesn't include the grant making of smaller foundations, which I want to acknowledge is an important part of this work, but just wanted to sort of give you that context. So these grants are coded on a lot of different dimensions. We have tons of variables that we code, but some of the key ones are subject area, type of support, meaning whether it's general support or program support, those sorts of things, and also the population group served. So let me spend just a minute talking about this last category, population group served. So there are two ways that the Foundation Center determines if a grant supports, in this case, Black men and boys. So one is by looking at the recipient organization of the grant and seeing if that organization's mission specifies that African American males are a focus of their work. And that's represented by that first green box on the left. So for example, any grant that is being given to Morehouse College because of its mission would be considered a grant that's explicitly designated to benefit Black males. The second way we can identify whether or not a grant supports Black men and boys is through the grant description, and whether or not that grant description states that Black males are the intended beneficiary of the grant. So that's the second green box. So that's pretty straightforward. After that, it gets a little fuzzier and a little bit more complicated. There are a lot of grants that don't include detailed information in the description about who the intended beneficiaries of the grant are. So for example, the grant may say that it supports men of color, but we don't know if that includes Black men or Latino men or, for that matter, any other group. And so for the purposes of this study, we've thought about those grants as potentially implicitly benefiting Black men and boys. We don't know for sure that these grants benefit African American males, but we can assume that at least some of the grants do. And then the rub is the red box at the right. Half of all grants that we look at actually don't have any information about population groups, and so we can't really code it one way or the other. So all of that is to say that is just to give you the context that the data that I'm sharing with you today do a pretty good job of capturing grant making that is explicitly designated to benefit Black men and boys based on what foundations themselves are telling us about the grant. But we do, we're not able to do as good of a job of capturing grants that might be indirectly or implicitly benefiting Black men and boys. So that said, that's sort of full disclosure, but that said, we think that these are the best available data out there, and it's important to start from somewhere to sort of get the conversation going. So with that background, I'm going to jump into the findings. So here's what the picture looks like in terms of foundation support for Black men and boys. The gold bars that you see indicate funding that was explicitly designated for Black men and boys in 2003. That was about $10 million. By 2010, that number grew to $28.6 million. So over that 8-year period, cumulatively, we have around $140 million in grant making that was intended to benefit Black men and boys. And then if you look at the gray bars, those are the implicit grants that I mentioned to you before. So these are grants that were for men of color, for ethnic minority males, and so we can assume that some portion of those grant dollars are also benefiting Black men and boys. So overall, the trend is positive, but just to give you, again, some context, the philanthropic sector awards more than $45 billion in grants every year. So we're looking at a very, very tiny percentage of grant dollars, and there's certainly opportunities for foundations to engage more with this issue. In terms of number of grants, we're seeing, again, a positive trend. In 2003, there were 75 grants explicitly designated for Black males, and in 2010, that number was just over 200. And again, positive trend, but still room for growth. In terms of subject area, 40% of the grant dollars were focused on education. The next largest chunk was for human services, and then with the rest of the slide, you see how the grant dollars break down in terms of other areas. The vast majority of these grant dollars are going towards program support, almost 90%, and then we have around 10% going to general operating support. Geographically, we found about a third of grants were focused on the South. Another third were in the Northeast. The West had 17% of grant dollars, but if you take a close look at this slide, almost 100% of those grant dollars were here in California. In terms of recipients, going back to the subject area breakdown we saw, it's not that surprising that the top 10 recipient list is heavily dominated by educational institutions, and it's topped by Morehouse College, which received almost $10 million in grants between 2008 and 2010. And everyone's always curious about who the top funders are. So the top funders in our analysis were Ford Foundation, Open Society, and California Endowment. Again, this is an analysis looking at 2008 through 2010 data. I think once we have an opportunity to look at more recent numbers, those positions may change a little bit given some of the initiatives that have been undertaken by OSF and California Endowment. There are copies of the full report out front, so I would encourage everyone to take a look. In addition to the quantitative data that I ran through, we have some really interesting profiles of innovative, interesting initiatives happening on the ground, including work the California Community Foundation is doing, and Mitchell Kapoor Foundation, Skillman Foundation, and others. So I'm gonna shift gears for a minute. This is sort of the highlights of our analysis, but I want to talk a little bit about bmafunders.org. As I mentioned, it launched in beta just last week, and this is one of the first audiences that's getting a look at it. So you can tell us what you think. But basically, this is a portal that builds on the work that we've done in the report, and the idea is to provide a whole host of tools and resources for folks working in this field. On the homepage, we have a feed of new and interesting blogs, announcements, research reports. So as new things are happening in the field, we try to capture it on the homepage. We have a section called Why BMA, so on why Black Male Achievement Matters. We have data points around education, health, justice, that we've done sort of an infographic style to really communicate the importance of this issue. The heart of the site is the interactive funding map, and I really encourage all of you to check this out because this takes the data, the static data that you find in the report, and allows you to really play with it and work with it. So if you're interested in what's going on in California, for example, you can click on California and see exactly which grants are being made by which foundations, for what purpose, for how much. The little pop-up you see there has zooms in on Northern California. There are 119 grants in our database just in this area, and if you look at that little yellow box that says See Grant Details, you click on that and you get a lot of detailed information about grant making in this region. The other thing I'll point out with the map is that up top in the navigation you'll see something that says demographics. We've built in a bunch of different demographic layers. The default one you see here, which is it's a green shading, is the percentage of the population of that state that is comprised of black males. But we have a bunch of other demographic indicators, including high school graduation rates, college attainment rates, median income, percentage of black males in poverty. And so that's a really good way, and we have that data actually at the county level. So that's a good way to understand sort of the context and the need juxtaposed upon the actual grant making that's happening. We also have a timeline of philanthropic milestones on the website. When we were doing the report, one of the things that became clear was that folks were really interested in the work that happened before to understand the work that's happening now. All of this is interactive, so you don't see it here, but there's a button on here if you want to add a milestone. If you have something interesting that you've done, if there's a new report coming out, you can actually add your own timeline entry. And then here we have the Knowledge Center. We've pulled together about 50 some odd reports that focus on black men and boys. We've summarized them, tagged them. You can do a full text search. The full text is available here. So it's all the data and information sort of combined in one place. There are a bunch of other resources on the site. There are case studies, there's an outcomes toolkit, there are a list of websites, so do check it out, let us know what you think. I'll just make one pitch for a few different ways you can get involved. You can, if you're a grant maker and you take a look at the map and you see that your data is not represented accurately, come talk to us. We'll make sure your work is accurately represented. If you're a smaller foundation and your grants aren't on here, come talk to us and we'll make sure they get on here. We really want to try to provide as complete a picture of grant making in this area as we can. As I said, we have case studies on the site, so contact us, tell us about your project, and we'll make sure there's a case study on the site so that we can feature your work. You can add a milestone to the timeline, you can sign up for email updates, and for those of you who like to tweet, you can follow us on Twitter. So as I said, this is in beta. We're going to be doing an official launch event at the AbbVie conference on April 6th. So for those of you who are there, we'll be doing a demo there and really kind of doing the rollout from that point on. So in the meantime, check it out and let us know what you think. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Greg.